How's it going out there in History 1510 land? Here we are for the second part of Chapter 6, the Americas and Oceania, early societies therein. Just checking the news, current events. The death of Justice Ginsburg now threatening real controversy within the U.S. Senate, right? Where the Republicans hold a 3-vote margin, Trump pushing, apparently, to fill that seat. And keep in mind that Supreme Court justices interpret the Constitution and serve for life terms, unless for some reason someone is removed for moral turbidity or something. You know, this has never happened, right? To fire or impeach a Supreme Court justice. So this should be interesting. A number of Republicans were against the confirmation of Merrick Garland in President Obama's last months in office. I believe it was the last 8 months. Now we have Trump, just really about a month and a half prior to an election, with an opportunity to fill the seat with a conservative justice. Ginsburg really a champion for civil rights, especially for women, minorities, gay, transgender community as well. So keep that in mind. Keep up with current events. Your vote matters. So does your opinion. Please, as always, base your opinion on objective facts. All right, so New York Times there. I don't need to editorialize. You guys can read the news yourself. In fact, it is your responsibility to do so. Not for a grade in this course, something actually more important. Being an educated American, an educated global citizen as well, right? Back to our course, content. We do have the tests are now in. I'm not grading them. They just came in a couple hours ago. I have over 100 exams to grade, times 5 questions per exam. So it's going to take a little bit of time, but look, you guys had a week to do them. So please give me a week at least to grade them. Quiz for Chapter 4. Probably by the time you view this will expire, but a quiz for Chapter 6 popping up. Where's the quiz for Chapter 5? Didn't have one, okay? We will actually focus more on China in the coming unit, where we really focus on some of the early Chinese history and bring in some more perhaps relevant topics, such as the flowering of philosophy during the late Warring States period, Confucianism, Taoism, legalism. All right, so tonight, that's not our topic. Our topic is Chapter 6. We get right into the material. A rather short chapter, and as I said previously, what do the Americas in the early era of organized society, civilization, have to do with early Oceania? Well, I mean, I guess there were some commonalities, right? We have people gathering and hunting. We have the invention of farming. We have people trying to organize their societies and either living in harmony or not in harmony with their environment. Really, there's no geographic connection, right? Different sides of the planet. What's happened here is your publisher, for convenience, has taken 2 rather slim topics. Slim not because they're unimportant, slim because historians have a bias for the written word. And these early societies, for the most part, Maya is certainly an exception, but for the most part, did not leave us a lot of written records. In fact, what the Maya left us was largely destroyed by the Spanish conquistadors in the early 16th century. So we have fewer primary sources to use, less to interpret. Historians not yet that adept at looking at forensic records and archaeological records and things, as we should be, frankly. Okay? So when there are fewer primary sources, historians have less to write about, thus the secondary source material is not that extensive. So instead of 2 really thin chapters, they put these 2 topics together into one fairly slim chapter. All right? Just looking, we did this, so I'm going to go through this very quickly. If you missed this, watch the previous video, right? Gatherers and hunters moving across the Bering Straits, or Beringia, 15,000 years ago, maybe longer. It's in dispute, right? This is the argument historians have. Like, we want to know. Why couldn't someone write it down? No, there was no writing in that era. Okay, so we need to look at other evidence. The invention, so to speak, of farming, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, the lower Gulf of Mexico, for corn. Fewer animals domesticated in this hemisphere, which will lead to epidemiological problems. Okay, since animals get sick, we have zootropic disease, right? Right now we're facing coronavirus that probably came from bats, to pangolins, to humans. Pangolins, I know I've never seen one. I don't think even in the zoo, but scaly mammals. They're actually really cute, but apparently they were the intermediary species in the passing of coronavirus to us. Possibly because people in part of the world, not to blame people, but this is why we try not to mix our own blood with animal blood. In wet markets in Asia where animals are slaughtered and people buy the fresh meat, they're seen as a delicacy. Right? So you cut a diseased pangolin, you maybe cut yourself, blood mixes, pangolin's diseased with a bat coronavirus, it now mutates into your system, it mutates again so it can be passed in an aerosol fashion by micro droplets coming out of our lungs. Which is why you're on the other side of the screen right now, and hopefully I'm not sick, hopefully you're not either. Back to the Olmecs. Huge carved heads, carved with rough stone, okay, no metals, but they did have a rubber ball game, pretty cool, okay? The Olmecs in purple here, Lower Gulf of Mexico, will influence the Maya, who do invent writing, as I just said, the Spanish thought it was really the work of the devil and destroyed as much as they could. Only recently, last 5 or 6 decades, been translated. So we do have the Mayan creation story. The Maya will adopt some of the architecture, especially the stepped pyramids, and make them even larger, the rubber ball game, which was played probably for religious purposes. Maybe religious ideas like the sun god, among other gods. This is common for agricultural people to worship the sun and the rain and the earth. Right? These borders here, obviously the map makers are kind of guessing, right? They're actually city-states throughout this region. Honduras to the Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala as well. On the other side, over here in what was the Lake District, a very wet area of now central Mexico, Lake Texcoco there at one time, so it kind of dried up, and humans had an impact on the flow of streams, etc. It's now very dry, but also very unstable topographically. This was a lake district, so you're wondering, like, where are the rivers? Well, there's the Gulf of Mexico, there are some rivers. Actually, in this region, over here, maybe more like near Chichen Itza, they're underground rivers, cenotes, right? So they're caves full of water, so if you punch a hole through the surface and drop a bucket, you have your water. Okay, so different challenges than irrigation or flood control, as we saw in other early societies, basically getting the water out of the ground. Okay? Not as much of a problem here in this lake district, which was well watered at least 1,000 years ago. So we talked about the Maya. We talked about them. I just did. Okay, so now we're moving into Teotihuacan, another heir, successor to the Olmecs in central Mexico. As we just said, this lake district, major city is constructed with stepped pyramids, not by aliens, people. I hate to, break that conspiracy. How else would you build something tall before the age of structural steel? You need a wide base, a smaller base, a smaller base, a smaller... Look, the Egyptians filled in the steps, right? Other people didn't. People of Teotihuacan, the Maya, Northern American Native Americans. Natives in North America will also build kind of stepped pyramidal structures later in places like Kayakea, Mississippi River. Fortunately or unfortunately, they built them out to, they built Kayakea, which was a city, I think near St. Louis, of about 30,000 people before the European entry. It was built out of ramped earth, so dirt packed together, which over time is going to erode. Right? So you see hills there now where you would have seen more of a stepped pyramid shape. Back to Mexico, people of Teotihuacan. I don't have that much to say. Frankly, neither does your book. Why? No writing, at least none we have discovered. Okay? Pyramids of the Sun and the Moon, Broad Avenue. This was largely a ceremonial center. The people would have lived in villages and come into Teotihuacan, the city, for religious purposes. So probably priests, priestesses lived in the city, or, as I just said, ceremonial center, but not a large population. I know a fellow who, at least last time I spoke with him, was doing an archaeological dig there. And I'm like, what's going on? Don't we know everything we can know about Teotihuacan? It's uncovered. And he's actually digging through basically the landfill, right, the garbage. Which I'm like, Yeah, that makes sense, right? I never would have thought of it as an historian, but like layers of garbage, right? Well, here's, the year 600, in the year 599, in the year 598, in the year 597. And you kind of see what people threw out. It tells you a lot about the society. My God, future historians are going to have a field day looking through our junk, okay? Well, there's an iPhone 10, and an iPhone 9, and an iPhone 8, and an iPhone 7, right? Kind of get the idea. The city was in decline and abandoned by 800. We're in the Common Era now, so this would have been 1,200 years ago. It doesn't mean the people disappeared. Their cultural legacy lived on, most likely in the Mexica people, and other people of actually northern central Mexico. Further to the north, who will build the great city of not Teotihuacan, although it sounds similar to our ears, Tenochtitlan. Right? Tenochtitlan was a major city when the Spanish arrived in the 1520s. A city of about 200,000 people when the Spanish arrived. Cortez and the other conquistadors, so-called, were amazed by what they saw. There was no city in Europe that even came close to housing 200,000 people. And it was a clean city. Broad streets, clean city, well organized. Very advanced mathematics and calendars and a rubber ball game. Very clean except for the big rack of skulls, which kind of disgusted even those, macho conquistadors. So Tenochtitlan, we need to learn more about it, and hopefully my former colleague who's doing an archaeological dig there and others will improve our knowledge. What did people throw away? It tells you a lot about their society. Further south, gatherers and hunters. I'm going to flip that there. By 14,000 years ago, are moving through the isthmus into what we would now call South America. We have settlements in many places, Amazon River Basin. But we're going to focus here in the mountains, the kind of the west coast, the Andes Mountains, where we have early agriculture. And in fact, we're going to see a number of crops. Quinoa will be one. But more importantly, perhaps, I actually like quinoa a lot. It's very nutritious, so try it sometime. You can cook it like rice, but it has more protein, especially if you're vegetarian. You probably know all about it already. What else was there? Guarana, yerba mate. I mean, there are a lot of these kind of trendy foods the people of the Andes were consuming thousands of years ago. And the one major food, the staple, will become the potato, or will be the potato, right? So they had to invent the potato, domesticate it. So you have to imagine just a little potato. You've got two potatoes, one's really tiny, like the size of a dime, and one's the size of a nickel. I'm hungry. No, eat the dime-sized one and plant the nickel-sized one. And then, after doing that a few times, you get one the size of a nickel and one the size of a quarter. Eat the nickel-sized one and plant the quarter-sized one, right? Do this many, many, many times over many human generations, and you'll start to have the white potato, okay? Which packs a lot of calories and, frankly, not a ton of nutrition. You need to supplement, and they did, they figured this out, supplement the potatoes' carbohydrates with beans or quinoa, which had protein. So you need both, right? You need some fats in there too. Not that I'm a nutritionist. Don't necessarily follow my advice on this, but the potato you're probably going to eat today, thanks to these people, which meant there were no potatoes anywhere else on Earth for a very long time. Certainly no potatoes in Europe. What about the Irish? Well, no, there's no potatoes in Ireland until, I don't know, the 1700s probably, right? In Asia, in Africa, no potatoes, right? Until sometime well after the 1600s. I don't know exactly when. Although the history of food is actually very interesting. Because when the potato and things like corn are taken from the Americas and planted in the so-called Old World, Europe, Africa, and Asia, population shoots up. All of a sudden there's these new calories, new nutrition, beans and corn and squash and potatoes, and maybe chocolate a little bit. Population goes up. So that's sad, where we end our semester. The Native American population is plummeting because the Europeans brought disease, and the population of Europe plus Africa, despite slavery, and Asia is kind of skyrocketing because of these new food sources. So we thank the Native Americans. Early Andean society, or in Andes Mountain. Your book argues that not a lot of contact with Mesoamerica. guess they're the experts. I'm not the expert on everything. I'm not the expert on many things, but certainly not really on Indian culture. But I don't know why there couldn't be contact with Mesoamerica. It's right here. These people are making like roads and paths through mountains. They're terracing the size of mountains. I'm sure they could, get to Mesoamerica. But anyway, Brooke argues differently, and that's okay. We both have to use facts, and they have a few more than I do right now, so we'll accept their interpretation. The people of the Andes had ceremonial centers. They didn't really leave us writing, except for kind of not sure exactly when this was invented either, but a colorful string tied in knots. Quipu. So on a ring, there are many different strings, different lengths, different knots, different types of knots, different colors, and that was, we believe, a way of record keeping. How if we can figure out what it was, right? This is a form of writing or recording one's culture that we've not yet deciphered. That's a real tough one. That's a real tough one. I'm just thinking back to like the olden days of like 100 years ago. Like if you had to remember something, people would tie like a string around their finger. Oh, I have to remember something. Not Harry Bailey. What was the George Bailey, right? His brother is anyway. It's a Wonderful Life. This was closer to Christmas. I could use that example. George Bailey's uncle puts a string around his finger to remember to put money in the bank, and I forgot to do it anyways. Anyway, off topic. One of the societies in the Andes was the Mexica. No writing, but some really cool pottery. Like you drink out of that. There's the nozzle. It's got a handle, and there's the nozzle, and you drink like corn beer out of it, which is even better, right? And some of these fired clay bottles, so to speak, show us a lot about society. There's one, I don't have the image right now, so I didn't find it, but it's like of a guy stumbling, kind of, and there's two people holding him up, like, oh, you drink too much corned beer, someone's gonna have to help you back to your dorm room, apparently, right? Topography is difficult, it's a mountainous region, and there are many regional difficulties. What we're leading toward here will be the powerful society of the Inca, I-N-C-A, that were probably at the peak of their power when the Spanish, or maybe just before the Spanish arrived, before they were beset by European disease, 1530s in that case. What about Oceania, an even shorter topic in our textbook, but the peopling, the migration. Again, the sea level's low, 20,000 years ago. You could walk island to island, or maybe wade, or maybe get on crude rafts and float from Malaysia through Indonesia to New Guinea into Australia. And then this is going to be later because there actually was too much water, you had to go to boats. To move through Oceania all the way up to like Hawaii by like, I don't know, 2,000 years ago, maybe 1,800 years ago. Right? But people walking into Australia, then the sea levels are going to rise, cutting them off. Like my hand, the shadow of my hand cuts them off. They can't walk back wherever home was. Well, there was no home because they were gatherers and hunters. 60,000 years ago this happened, right? So during low sea levels, you could also float by, lash some logs together. We'll call those boats. Remember, hunting includes fishing, and the Aboriginal people, we'll call them of Australia, will remain gatherers and hunters and fisher folk when the Europeans arrive. The Europeans arrived when? About 300 years ago, right? 1780s. And here's the problem. When the Europeans arrived, they looked at these folk and said, they're still cave people. How inferior. We can take their land and we can push them off and we can boss them around. Okay? Nah, they weren't cave people. They gathered and hunted into the late 18th century because that was a way of living in harmony with their environment. It was too dry to farm. Okay? It was too difficult to raise livestock. Not a lot of, similar to the Native Americans, not a lot of animals ended up in Australia that could be domesticated. Do you think you could domesticate a kangaroo? Probably not, folks, okay? They'll kick you right out the door, if you have a door. So there was less contact with the outside world, but the Aboriginal people, the native people of Australia, lived in harmony with their environment.